I'd now like to call on our chairperson, Richard Dent, please, to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Catherine. Well, welcome everyone. I also acknowledge that we're on Indigenous land here, always was, always will be. Kim Houghton, I've known for many years, and we have collaborated on a whole range of issues in relation to regional Australia, including convincing the federal government to invest an enormous amount in community leadership and disaster resilience. Kim's an independent economist, well known for his ability to make data make sense. He has been at the Regional Australia Institute for many years. You've probably seen him on TV from time to time when it's in relation to regional Australia issues. His current consulting company, Strategic Economic Solutions, helps communities respond to economic challenges that they face by being in rural, regional or remote Australia. So I'd like to welcome Kim. You might like to ask where he is. Well, I haven't got the foggiest. That should be plain to see. He was flying down from Canberra, but it was turned away because Melbourne Airport was closed. But we're experimenting in these unprecedented times, and we're going to welcome Kim on the screen by Zoom. Welcome to Kim.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you, President Catherine. I really would have loved to have been there today. This digital world's all very well, but there's nothing like fellowship in person. I was a Rotary exchange student after year 12 to Japan and had a lot of Rotary meetings in that country, and then back in Tasmania, where I was sent from as well. So I'm always been very thankful for that experience from Rotary, and very happy to contribute to the discussions that Rotarians have on a whole range of social issues. And listening to your sort of packed program, you've got a lot of activities and a lot of fantastic community service activities going on, which is great to see. I've been working on regional issues for probably about 30 odd years. For about 8 years of that was the chief economist at the Regional Australia Institute. I've also worked, as Richard said, with various leadership organisations, Leadership Victoria, and also the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation. So that sort of nexus between regional leadership and regional information is really important to me. And what I wanted to do today, really in a fairly short space of time, is just bust a few myths about what you think might be going on in regional Australia, and particularly look at the interactions between Melbourne and regional Victoria. I'm very happy for the content to be shared around. I've got a bit of data in there. I'm an economist. Apologies about that in advance. My favourite definition of an economist is somebody who didn't quite have the personality to make it as an accountant. Which I think, if you think about it, reflects quite well on both sides, actually. But I do have some data. I don't think you'll be able to see it very much in the room, so I'll tell stories around the data rather than relying too heavily on the charts and tables. But I'm very happy for that to be shared around Rotarians, and also for this video to be made available too. So what I'll do is bring up the presentation and just run through some of the issues that I'm seeing at the moment about how regional Australia is changing, and what that means for you folks in the heart of things in the centre of Melbourne. That's not working, is it? Why is it not working? Oh, here we go. So one thing we often get this, it's a difficult sort of starting point. A lot of decision makers have this sort of overwhelming sense that regional Australia is generally declining. There's a sort of drain of people from the centre of the country to the coastal fringe. Now, that's not actually true. And certainly over the last 5 years, all parts of regional Australia have grown in population, even those most inland parts. So we don't have this heavy drain of people from the centre to the regions. Sure, the populations in some of our most inland places are growing really slowly, but as a group, those inland places have grown in the last 5 years, about 2%. About 2%. There are, of course, places that are struggling, but not that many, and they need special attention. So about 11 regional local government areas lost more than 10% of their population over that 5 years, and only 5 of them lost more than 500 people. And a lot of those are mining communities going through that sort of boom-bust cycle. Kununurra is not one of those, but it's representative of those sorts of places. So underlying message here, we've seen a lot of population growth across regional Australia over the last 5 years. Regional cities, in particular Ballarat, Bendigo, Geelong, have grown really strongly. In fact, technically, they grew faster than the capitals in that period. Now, the interesting thing is what's driving that, and there's a couple of key things that I want to talk about. There's three. There's jobs, housing, and population movement, all that relates to that this period of growth that regional Australia, particularly regional Victoria, is in at the moment. Now, those at the back there, you won't be able to see the detail on this slide, so it really is just to give you a sense of how important job growth has been in regional Australia over the last decade. Most governments, still state government largely, and certainly the federal government, when they think about employment, they think about employment creation. They're still very big on promoting the number of jobs that a project will bring. If you can see the right-hand end of this chart, it really shows us that, in fact, we don't need more jobs to be created in regional Australia in particular. We need more jobs to be filled. What's happened over the last decade is a significant increase in the rate of job vacancies that regional employers are looking to fill across Australia. On the left-hand side of this chart, there's this hump there at about 60,000 job vacancies per month, which was the height of the mining boom. It kind of fell away in the middle of the chart. And the blue line is regions. The orange line, if you can see it, is metro. What happened in COVID is sort of slightly on the right-hand side of the middle, that circle. Time of COVID, job vacancies plummeted. Nobody was hiring. That's fair enough. But what happens after that has been quite extraordinary. Regional job growth picked up a lot earlier and a lot faster than metro, and it's actually stayed a lot higher in relative terms than metro job growth. So a lot of our fundamental economic strength in Australia through COVID and beyond has been powered by regions, not by the capital cities. And this is quite an important one. I know the work that Rotary does with schools is really critical, and this is part of a picture of rapid change for our school students particularly across regional Australia. This is the same time period, so I've got the mining boom on the left, and then current period on the right. It's the same basic data. It comes from Jobs and Skills Australia, and this is about job vacancies by occupation. And all I've done here is I've broken it up by sort of low-skilled, medium-skilled, and high-skilled occupations. And on the left-hand side, the mining boom, the big job vacancies were for technical and trades workers, and to some degree for professions. That was what the mining boom brought to regional Australia. A lot of it fell away, as we saw on the previous chart, which had the total job vacancies by occupation. It all kind of fell away soon after that. So 2012, 13, 14, 15, the job vacancy growth was relatively modest across regional Australia. We see the COVID blip in about the same point, just to the right of the middle of the chart. And then look at the acceleration since then. What's happened across regional Australia since 2020 is this rapid job growth, not in labouring, partly in trades, but overwhelmingly in professional jobs. So regional employers have been desperately seeking professional workers, particularly in the last 3 or 4 years. Really major change. Top of the listed professions. Next up is technical and trades. The next largest group has come out of nowhere, really, just in this 10-year period, which is community and personal service workers. They're the social services that glue our regional communities together. So what this tells us is just in the last 10 years, so it's basically, if somebody's finishing up in year 12 now, they would have been in about year 2 when this change started. So just in the time these folks have been at school, you've seen this major shift away from low-skilled labouring jobs being needed in regions to high-skilled trades and technical jobs, and this enormous growth in demand for personal service workers. Big change in the nature and the mix of jobs that are available in regions. Employers in regions are having no end of trouble filling these jobs. The demand is there. The communities want these workers, but they're having a lot of trouble. Employers are having a lot of trouble filling them. Why is this so much of an issue for regions? It's partly the drive in that growth has partly been because of there's a two-way street with people moving. So people have been moving to regional Australia from capital cities, particularly from Melbourne into regional Victoria, very strongly since the pandemic, and I'll give you some numbers on that in a sec. Now that brings labour, of course, but it also creates more jobs. So it's regional Australia and regional Victoria has really been chasing its own tail. The population's been growing, it's been supplying workers, but as it grows, the need for more workers gets even higher, and particularly the need for these higher skilled workers. This chart is work that I lead at the Regional Australia Institute, which is a partnership with the Commonwealth Bank. We set out in early 2020 to really map, was this tree change phenomenon that we thought was happening around the time of the pandemic, how real was it? Was there really a flow out of the cities to the regions? Now, the pandemic period's in the middle of this chart. It's got a sort of a light shading behind it. And what it shows is this is the share of all people moving around Australia. This is the share of people moving from capitals to regions. That's the top line, and from regions to capital. That's the bottom line. When the pandemic hit, the share of people moving out of capitals went up, So that was true. There was some evidence based on Commonwealth Customer Bank relocations. There was some evidence that people from cities were moving to regions. At the same time, people in regions knew they were onto a good thing and they slowed down their movement back to the cities. There's always a flow around. They really slowed that down. So that's the middle period. Elevated rates of flow out of the cities and reduced rates of flow back to the cities. That created that was the foundation of the regional housing crisis. We had more people wanting to move to regional places and fewer people leaving and putting their houses up for sale or rent. That was the start of that sort of housing crisis. Post-pandemic, you can see those lines are starting to come back together again. So those rapid flows out of cities have slowed a bit, and the low flows back to cities have gone up a little bit, but they're still much wider than they were before the pandemic. So we've still got elevated levels, more people than before the pandemic moving from cities to regions, and fewer people than before the pandemic moving from regions back to cities. So that flow really it goes well past the pandemic, and it looks like it's something that's baked in, at least in the medium term. And certainly, technology like this that we're using now is really allowing a lot of people to live and work in a regional setting in a way that they just couldn't 4 or 5 years ago. So a lot of mobility, but a lot of movement from cities to regions. Now, what I want to talk to you a little bit about, if I've got a couple of minutes, is how that's impacting on Melbourne, because there's really quite a striking story here about Melbourne. Now, there's way too much information on this screen for you to be able to read, so I just want to talk you through it. And if you do want to have a look at the presentation when it does the rounds, please do, because this is from the Regional Movers Index that the Institute does with the Commonwealth Bank. What we noticed over a number of years of looking at where people were moving from and to, there does seem to be a bit of a pattern of people, of those who are leaving Melbourne. There were 3 local government areas that shed the largest numbers of people to regional Victoria. Firstly, the City of Melbourne, where you guys are now, that was shedding quite a significant share of people, but also to the southwest and the southeastern, really fringe urban, those new urban growth areas. People are leaving those suburbs in droves to go regional, and this data on the right-hand side of this shows that those that left Wyndham, which is your southwest sort of growth corridor area, in the City of Melbourne, in Greater Melbourne, those that were leaving were predominantly young folks, millennials and people younger, so people basically well under 40. Same from Melbourne. Casey a little less so. Casey, the numbers were smaller, but there was still that broad pattern of young folks leaving. Now, I was interested to see where they go, and there's a little map down the bottom which you won't be able to see, but if you get the slides or get the report, you will. The largest proportion of those were going to Greater Geelong, then to the Gold Coast, and then to Ballarat. Gold Coast is a bit of a winner from all over the country. Lots of folks leaving cities going to the Gold Coast, but from Melbourne, Geelong and Ballarat were the next 2 most popular destinations. So there was another sort of interesting story for me. There was, why are these young folks leaving? What sort of people are they? And here's a comparison slide, and again, there's too much to sort of go into it in great detail. But essentially, we've got at the top of the chart, we've got the 5 local government areas that saw the biggest increases in inflows from cities. 2 of those are in Victoria, Greater Geelong and Moorabool. The source places for people going to Geelong, the largest source by far was Wyndham. So 16% of all the people who moved to Geelong from a capital city came from Wyndham. And the largest source place for Moorabool, which is to just northwest of the outer urban fringe, was from Melton. So you've got this picture of folks living in those new urban growth areas. I think you had a lunchtime talk recently about the Greater Victoria plan, the settlement plan. These folks are living in Melton and clearly not enjoying this sort of outer suburban lifestyle they've landed in, and they're moving further regional. So they're moving to one of the towns and villages that's outside the greater metropolitan boundary and in regional Victoria. Same with Wyndham, not happy with that fringe urban lifestyle, looking to move to Geelong. And the numbers down the bottom tell us how long they've been living in their previous place. So of the folks who left Melton to go regional, well over half of them had only been there for less than 3 years. And remember, these are young folks, perhaps in that family formation stage. So you've got a whole bunch of us, residents of Greater Melbourne, who are sort of gravitating towards those outer metropolitan growth areas because that's where housing availability is best, being there for 1, 2, 3 years and saying, no, this is not for me. I'm going further out. I'm going to try and find a sense of community. So as far as I think there's a nice sort of twist there for sort of community service building and Rotary, you've got this significant flow of younger folks, good catchment for sort of Rotary Club membership, moving out of their outer suburban regions, lobbing into a new area, very much like I think Barry was telling us about Kununurra. They would be a very suitable target, I think, for helping them to sort of build those local connections through a Rotary Club. They're the right sort of age, and they'll certainly have that aspiration to find a sense of community, because we assume this is part of the reason that they're leaving that outer fringe urban environment. Now, none of this stuff's in the greater Victoria settlement strategy. It's still about growth at the urban fringe. There's always lip service played to densification across Melbourne. You know, we'll build some more high rise. We'll get some efficiencies in housing. That's all true. But nobody in the planning department is looking at the consequences of people being dissatisfied with that outer urban lifestyle and moving towards a regional setting. There is no resource in going to the towns and villages in Melton or in Moorabool or Greater Geelong to help with that increased flow out of the greater urban area. It's really not part of people's thinking. It needs to be, because if we keep building stuff on the urban fringe that people don't like, they'll keep leaving it. And we really ought to be resourcing people's choices rather than forcing them to live in an outer suburban lifestyle that they're clearly not happy with. What that does is push housing prices up. Simple chart here of median house prices. For orange is regional areas and blue is metro areas. Very significant house price rises across all of regional Australia over the last 3 or 4 years. The median house price in regions has gone up now to about $627,000. Capitals also went up. So regions have gone up about $210,000 in this last price cycle. Capitals have gone up about, on average, about $220,000 as well. But because the regionals are starting from a lower base, it's a much more significant percentage. So across all of regional Australia, regional house prices have gone up an average of about 60%. Now, that's absolutely bonkers, because if 60% is the average, then 80% is not unusual, and neither is 40%. Now, you know, years ago, a 20% price rise across regions over 3 or 4 years would have been unheard of. Now we've got a 60% average, which means that 80% price rise is not unheard of. We are seeing places where the house price in regions has doubled because of that increased interest in living in a regional area and the increased diversity of jobs that are available and needing to be filled in those regional places. Just as a sort of a trivia question, in every capital city, there are a couple of local government areas outside the greater capital boundary whose median house price is higher than the capital city. Melbourne's no exception. Surf Coast and Queenscliff both have median house prices well above the average for Greater Melbourne. So this is part of that sort of desirability, driving demand, driving increasing price. So there's a lot of money looking to settle in regional Victoria. So, you know, just to tie that all together and finish up, I'm very, very happy to take some questions. You know, there are really strong growth prospects for regional Victoria. I mean, growth in a good way, not just growth in a bad way. Population growth has been above anybody's expectations. The State Planning Department got it wildly wrong in its last projections about 3 years ago, and as did every other state. So there's no trouble there. Those numbers really need to be revised. That's led to very tight housing markets. A lot of new supply is needed in regional places, and that includes medium density housing, funnily enough, in regional places. The social infrastructure in a lot of the regional towns and villages across regional Victoria is really stretched. Business and employment growth has been very strong in high value service industries, but with those inflows of people, a lot of those community services are really stretched. They're serving a sort of population base they really weren't expecting to. And again, state governments are having trouble playing catch up. There is actually, we did some modelling with national economics in Melbourne. There is a national GDP benefit, a national overall economic benefit from accelerating regional city growth. Those smaller regional cities have a greater growth potential at lower investment costs than the capital. So, you know, in some scenarios, Melbourne's a productive place. City of Melbourne in particular is very productive. You know, let's see that grow and everybody benefits. In fact, because of the diseconomies of scale, as that densification passes a certain point, there's actually greater returns on investment to investing in our regional cities in terms of growth. That's not on many people's radar either. And lastly, in terms of sort of investment and sort of business opportunities, one of the things that really excites me is that regional consumers are becoming more and more sophisticated. The tree change phenomenon is real. So some people want to go regional because they want to go bush. But for many ex-Melbourne movers, they're looking actually for not so much a sort of a real bush environment, but for a more accessible and affordable metro lifestyle. And Ballarat Council did some really interesting market research a couple of years ago where they telephone surveyed people living in Melbourne who are about to move to Ballarat and asked what they were looking for. Yes, there's the sort of quality of life, smaller commute, all those sort of issues were in there. But buried in all those responses was the sense that a lot of these folks were living in parts of Melbourne where they weren't getting access to the kind of urban, sort of vibrant street life that they wanted to. They were pushed out into these outer suburban areas and felt they could find that in Ballarat. So thinking about Ballarat's trajectory, it's not just about selling the sea change lifestyle, it's about selling it as a vibrant urban hub. And that feeds back to this notion that regional consumers are becoming more sophisticated. And I finish off with a couple of examples of that for you. Any thoughts? See, I was going to ask this question in person, but I can't do that now. Any thoughts on what the greatest unmet housing demand might be in our regional centres? 5 quarter acre blocks, 5 acre blocks, what are we looking at? In fact, the greatest demand is for 1 or 2 bedroom units. And that actually is true for our smaller towns and villages as much as it is true for the larger regional centres. There's a real massive undersupply of 1 or 2 bedroom units. Main markets for those being older people who want to downsize and young folks, young professionals who are cycling through some of these communities. I'll finish up in a sec. Second sort of pop quiz. Here's a 13-storey development in a regional centre. Do you know where this is? It's in Dubbo. Dubbo has nothing like this. It's pretty much sold out primarily to local folks who have been looking for an alternative to the sort of large home on a large lot for themselves and their families for years. And now this is coming to fruition. It's been a real challenge to get it up, but it's certainly proving very popular. And you know, it's no significant stretch to see that there is actually underlying demand for these sort of high density projects, even in Ballarat, Bendigo, and even places like Shepparton. I would argue too, there's unmet demand for this. Now, this scares a lot of folks because that's just not what they want to see in their regional town, which is why I talk mostly about 1 or 2 bedroom units, which are much easier to blend into the landscape. But it is true that underlying these sort of societal shifts and this sophistication of regional markets, there is growing demand for even high density in even some of our regional centres. And lastly, and most sort of optimistically and sort of happily, I think, as a sign of this sophistication, one of my favourite places across regional Victoria is the distillery in Echuca. Why? Because last year at the San Francisco International Spirit Competition, it won a gold medal for its flavoured tequila, a chili and lime agave tequila. So you've got sophisticated taste, sophisticated producers, sophisticated entrepreneurs doing really successful on global markets in regional Victoria. So I'll stop there and very happy to take some.
Things like the energy projects that are moving to the regions, is that sort of going to drive, we don't want it in our backyard, or yes, I really want it because I want a job? What's the sort of political sort of dynamic there in play, perhaps?
I heard the last part of that about the political dynamics and the jobs and older people and younger people. Was that the sort of the content of the question? Yeah. And look, it is really mixed. There are pools of people who are older folks who are looking to retire and make the most of their money by moving regionally. But I think what that regional movers index data showed me, I was really surprised. The places where those folks are going in large numbers are generally quite a select group of local government areas. What's much more prevalent across a much wider range of local government areas are these millennials and Gen Alpha and Gen Z folks who are moving. We think certainly for job opportunities, Regional Australia Institute did a study last year called Big Movers, which had a special look where millennials are moving around regional Australia. They have a higher propensity to move to more remote places than older folks, for instance. And that's partly, I think, because a lot of those younger folks are looking to, build their profession, build their career by sort of doing a bit of a staging post through different regional places. And that's part of their sort of part of their life plan. So the availability of housing and the availability of jobs is absolutely crucial for them. The jobs one is not so critical, of course, for older folks, although that internet connectivity and that ability to work from home from a regional centre, I think, has been a real boon for people later in their careers who are looking to do a bit of a bridge between sort of working and then moving into retirement from a regional place. It's really diverse. I mean, I think the bottom line for me is that for most the small towns that we've looked at, somewhere between about 15 to 25% of the population is newcomers every 5 years. So there's a lot of churn in regional populations, even in those few places where the headline population is not growing much. There's a lot of churn underneath that as people come and go all the time.
Yeah. I'm quite familiar with the area of Geelong and the greater area of down to Queenscliff. And one of the needs that you have expressed for a vibrant urban environment is not met there, because although the housing estates are quite prolific and the shall we say, the shops and shopping centres are amazing. It's like at night, it's like going into Rio. So brightly lit and lots of facilities. They don't have the common town hall or centre hall, or in the olden days, the church used to move in and it would have a church hall where people could, for example, young kids could get together and form a band and practice. This has been a problem also in Western Sydney, where they're churning out lots of graduates in music, but they've got nowhere to practice. And I think that's something that perhaps state government could insist that in an area there is. Yeah. Is there some way in which you can see that developers are required to produce a common meeting hall or area that the community can get together and feel like a community?
Yeah, look, just two quick points on that. One is that, one sort of angle on what you're talking about is actually the growing sort of gentrification of our older places. So they are becoming more sophisticated investments going in, which is taking away some of those underutilized spaces. They're being commercialized essentially. Now there've got to be ways of returning some of that value capture back to the community. So that's one thing. The other thing, as far as the developers go, I used to work for Lendlease for a while, and we set up a sort of small business support service in one of their large development areas, about 6,000 homes over a sort of 15-year build period. The thing that got that thing over the line was, because we've been talking about exactly those sort of community spaces, and the project director we were talking to suddenly said, "Oh, you're talking in terms of size and space. You're basically talking about one or two houses on the sort of periphery of what will become our commercial centre." And I said, yes, that's all we're talking about, is one or two properties. So for them to then build into their town planning around that town centre, the ability for a couple of those properties to be available for community use for an extended period, that changed the whole game, because it wasn't it was a slight sort of loss of profit for them, but only a marginal loss of profit. And they could see that by enabling those premises to be available for community uses, it would really help to accelerate that community building in the short term. So, those things can be done. Developers are very sort of cost sensitive. They don't want additional costs imposed on them. But if the language is right, and if you're able to sort of communicate with the project directors in a way that helps them meet their aims as well, I think there's a lot of creative thinking that can go on to provide those new sort of shared spaces, even in sort of new development areas.
And Kim, thank you very much for your presentation. I hope the technologies were not too bad. I'm glad you could wing it. Sorry, the session had a good takeoff, and this is not such a good landing, I suppose. But yeah, anyway. So Kim, thank you very much. We have a special gift for you here, which is a gift of Rotary socks, which are 200% Australian made in Preston by our very own past president, Phil Endersby. And I'll just see if they go through the no. We don't have that technology yet. Sorry, it's just a matter of time. But thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could join me in thanking our speaker.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your patience with this virtual delivery today. It would be much more preferable to be there in person.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kim. We hope to welcome you in Naarm at some point, in Melbourne at some point in the future. Right. So thanks, there we go. Thank you very much. Thank you, visitors and guests, for attending today. Special thanks, of course, to our MC, Tony Battani, and for their reflection, Tony, for Philip Cornish, and for our setup and reception teams. If anyone's got some time to stay back to help with the pack down, that would be very much appreciative. Our next week's meeting is here at number 35, and it will be our annual Monash Medal presentation, as we heard earlier, to the Honourable Josh Frydenberg. So please book to attend this special day.